Corporal Lee Hanna's boots made wet sounds on the metal floor as she dragged herself through the automatic doors of the medical bay. Each step sent fire shooting up her left leg where the plasma blast had caught her during yesterday's battle. The smell of antiseptic and alien medicines hit her nose, mixing with the metallic taste of pain medication she'd been chewing like candy for the past 6 hours. The space station's medical wing buzzed with activity. Doctors from 12 different species moved between patients, their various tools beeping and humming in languages she couldn't understand. Through the massive viewport that dominated one wall, the orange glow of a distant star painted everything, in warm light. But Hanna felt anything but warm. Her uniform hung loose on her thin frame, torn in 3 places and stained with dried blood that wasn't all hers. The fabric stuck to her wounds, making every movement a small torture. She needed to sit down before she collapsed, but the peace negotiations were starting in 2 hours, and she had to be there. As the only human who spoke fluent Galactic Standard and had fought on the front lines, her testimony about human military capabilities was crucial. That's when she saw it. A simple metal chair positioned perfectly by the viewport, empty and waiting. The cushioned seat looked like heaven compared to standing on her burning leg for another minute. She began limping toward it, already imagining the relief of taking weight off her injured limb. But she'd only taken 3 painful steps when a shadow fell across her path. The Krex warrior rose from a nearby bench like a mountain coming to life. 8 feet of pure muscle and attitude, covered in dark green scales that caught the medical bay's harsh lighting. Its 4 arms flexed as it moved, each one thick enough to crush a human skull. The creature's head resembled a cross between a lizard and a shark, with rows of teeth visible even when its mouth was closed. "Stop right there, little human," the alien said, its voice coming through a translator device that made every word sound like gravel grinding together. "That chair is not for your kind." Hanna stopped, swaying slightly on her good leg. Around the medical bay, other aliens paused their conversations to watch. A group of tall, grey-skinned Thyrans whispered among themselves. 2 insect-like Zelen clicked their mandibles in what might have been amusement. Even the medical staff slowed their work to see what would happen. "I just need to sit for a moment," Hanna said quietly, trying to keep her voice steady. "My leg is injured and I'm waiting for treatment." The Krex warrior stepped directly in front of the chair, all 4 arms crossed over its massive chest. "Humans. Stand. Chair is for real warriors only, not for weak species who lose every battle they fight." The words hit harder than any physical blow. Hanna felt her face flush with anger and shame. It was true that humans had suffered losses in the recent conflicts. Their technology was centuries behind most galactic civilizations. Their ships were slower, their weapons weaker, their armor less advanced. But they fought anyway, because someone had to protect the outer colonies from raiders and slavers. "I fought on Proxima 7, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Lost half my unit holding the evacuation zone." "And you lost the planet too," the Krex replied with what sounded like laughter. "Typical human failure. No strength, no honor, no purpose." Other aliens nodded in agreement. She heard fragments of conversation in various languages, most of it unflattering. The universal translator in her ear caught words like primitive, useless, and why are they even here? Hanna felt her knees starting to shake. The adrenaline that had kept her moving through the battle and the long trip to the station was finally wearing off. Her vision blurred at the edges, and she gripped the wall for support. Every instinct screamed at her to fight back, to defend herself and her species. But she was one small human surrounded by dozens of aliens who clearly saw her as inferior. The smart thing to do was walk away, find somewhere else to rest, avoid making a scene that could hurt the peace negotiations. Humans needed these talks to succeed more than anyone else. So she bit back the angry words that wanted to pour out, swallowed her pride along with the metallic taste of blood in her mouth, nodded once to show she understood, even though understanding felt like swallowing broken glass. The Krex warrior smiled, showing far too many teeth. It settled into the chair she'd wanted, spreading its bulk wide to make sure she knew who was in charge. Hanna turned away, each step a small defeat that echoed in the suddenly quiet medical bay. Hana's knees hit the cold metal floor with a soft thud that seemed to echo through the medical bay. The surface was unforgiving, designed for easy cleaning rather than comfort. Within seconds, she could feel the chill seeping through her torn uniform pants, adding another layer of misery to her already overwhelming pain. She tried to find a position that didn't make her wounded leg scream in protest, but everything hurt. Sitting straight put pressure on the plasma burns running down her thigh. Leaning to one side made her ribs ache where shrapnel had clipped her during the evacuation. Finally, she settled into an awkward half-lean against the wall, doing her best to look dignified while sitting on the floor like a child. The Krex warrior made a show of settling into the chair she'd wanted, its massive frame filling every inch of the cushioned seat. It stretched its forearms wide, claiming even more space than necessary. The alien's scaled face wore an expression that didn't need translation, pure satisfaction at putting a human in her place. "Much better," the Krex rumbled, its translator, making the words sound like rocks tumbling down a mountain. Now the seating arrangement reflects the natural order of things. A passing Xelon diplomat paused near Hana's spot on the floor. The insect-like creature's compound eyes fixed on her for a moment, before it clicked its mandibles in what she'd learned was their version of disgust. "Weak species," it muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Why did the Council even invite them to these negotiations? What could humans possibly contribute? The Xelon's words carried across the medical bay, and Hana watched as other aliens nodded in agreement. A group of blue-skinned Vorthans stopped their conversation to stare at her with obvious disdain. Two crystalline Nexari chimed something in their musical language that made nearby species laugh. She didn't need a translator to know they were mocking her. "Their ships are centuries behind ours," one of the Vorthans said, not bothering to lower its voice. "Their weapons are barely more advanced than throwing rocks. How did they even survive this long?" "Luck," replied another alien whose species Hana didn't recognize. "Dumb luck and the fact that nobody bothered to conquer their little corner of space until now." The conversations continued around her, each comment like a knife twist in her gut. They talked about humanity's recent military failures, as if she wasn't sitting right there, discussed their inevitable defeat, like it was already written in stone, debated whether humans even deserved a seat at the negotiating table. That's when the Thiran medic approached, carrying a small kit of medical supplies. The tall grey-skinned creature moved with the careful grace of its species, but its large black eyes kept darting nervously toward the Krex warrior. Thirans were peaceful by nature, more interested in healing than fighting, which made them natural. Allies to humans in some ways. "I am sorry," the medic whispered in accented galactic standard as it knelt beside Hana. "This is not right. You should not have to endure treatment on the floor." But even as it spoke, the Thiran's voice was barely audible, and its movements were quick and nervous. It was afraid to speak up, afraid to challenge the Krex directly. Like most of the smaller species, Thyrans had learned that keeping their heads down was the safest way to survive in galactic politics. Hana wanted to tell the medic not to worry about it, that she understood the position it was in, but her throat felt too tight to speak. Instead, she just nodded and tried to hold still while the alien cleaned and rebandaged her wounds. The process was awkward and painful with both of them on the floor. The medic had to contort itself into uncomfortable positions to reach her injuries properly. Supplies kept sliding away on the smooth metal surface. What should have been a simple 5-minute procedure stretched into a lengthy ordeal that drew even more attention from the watching aliens. "Look at that," someone said with obvious amusement. "The human is so weak it needs medical treatment just from one little battle. No wonder they lose every fight." "I heard they lost an entire colony ship to pirates last month," another voice added. "Pirates, not even a real military force." The Krex warrior leaned back in its stolen chair, clearly enjoying the show. "This is what happens when inferior species try to play with their betters," it announced to the room. "Perhaps now they will learn their place in the galaxy." Each word felt like a physical blow. Hana's face burned with shame and anger, but she was trapped. Fighting back would only prove their point about human aggression and lack of diplomacy. Staying silent felt like accepting every insult they threw at her. The humiliation was worse than any physical pain she'd endured on Proxima 7. At least in battle, she could fight back. Here, surrounded by dozens of hostile aliens in a supposedly neutral medical facility, she was completely powerless. She could only sit on the cold floor and take it while they discussed her species like she was deaf. The medic finished its work and packed up its supplies, offering another whispered apology, before hurrying away. Hannah was left alone on the floor, listening to the conversation swirl around her like poison. The cold metal floor had started to numb Hannah's legs after sitting in the same position for nearly an hour. Her wounded thigh throbbed with a steady pulse that matched her heartbeat, and she knew she needed to shift her weight before the circulation got cut off completely. She tried to move as quietly as possible, not wanting to draw more attention from the aliens, who had finally moved on to other conversations. As she adjusted her position, trying to find some relief for her aching muscles, she felt something crinkle in her uniform pocket. The sound was soft, barely audible over the hum of medical equipment, but it reminded her of what she'd been carrying. Her fingers instinctively moved toward the pocket, but the movement was too sudden. The folded piece of paper that had been tucked safely away slipped out and fluttered toward the floor. Time seemed to slow as Hannah watched the letter fall. It was just a simple piece of white paper, worn soft from being folded and unfolded so many times. The edges were slightly torn, and there were small stains on one corner where someone had spilled juice while writing. To anyone else it would look like nothing important, just another piece of human trash. But to Hannah it was everything. She lunged forward, ignoring the spike of agony that shot through her injured leg. Her fingers stretched toward the paper, almost close enough to grab it, but the Krex warrior was faster than she expected for something so massive. One of its 4 arms shot out with lightning speed, clawed fingers closing around the letter just before Hannah could reach it. No! The word tore from her throat before she could stop it. The alien held the paper up, examining it with the casual interest of someone picking up litter. "What is this pathetic human scribble?" it rumbled, turning the letter over in its massive hand. "More of your species' primitive writing? Give it back," Hannah demanded, struggling to push herself up from the floor. Her leg buckled under her weight, and she had to grab the wall for support. "That's private. It doesn't belong to you." The Krex's scaled lips pulled back in what might have been a smile. "Everything here belongs to whoever is strong enough to take it. That is the way of the galaxy." It began to unfold the paper with deliberate slowness, clearly enjoying Hannah's distress. "Let us see what passes for important communication among your kind." Hannah felt panic rising in her chest like cold water. That letter was the most precious thing she owned, more valuable to her than her weapons or her medals or even her military commission. It was the reason she kept fighting when everything seemed hopeless, the reason she pushed through pain and exhaustion and fear. "Please," she whispered, hating how desperate she sounded. "Just give it back. You can have the chair, you can say whatever you want about humans, but please don't read that." But the Krex was already scanning the handwritten text, its translator, working to decode the carefully formed letters. The alien's 4 eyes moved across the page, and Hannah watched in horror as her most private moment was violated by this creature, who had already humiliated her in front of everyone. The medical bay had grown quieter as other aliens noticed what was happening. Conversations died down as beings from different species turned to watch the confrontation. Some looked amused, others curious. A few seemed uncomfortable with the Krex's behavior, but none of them spoke up. The Krex's expression began to change. As it read, the cruel satisfaction that had twisted its features started to fade, replaced by something that looked almost like confusion. Its massive head tilted slightly to one side, the way someone might look when trying to understand a difficult concept. The alien's breathing, which had been deep and regular, became shallower. Its grip on the paper loosened slightly, though it didn't let go. The translator around its neck continued to process the words on the page, turning the simple Korean characters into sounds the creature could understand. Other aliens in the medical bay started to notice the Krex's strange behavior. The warrior, who had been so aggressive and dominating just moments before, now stood perfectly still. Its 4 arms had dropped to its sides except for the one holding the letter. Even its tail, which had been lashing back and forth with predatory energy, hung motionless. A Thyran medic who had been treating a patient across the room stopped what it was doing to stare. Two Vorthan diplomats exchanged puzzled glances. Even the insect-like Zelon who had mocked Hana earlier clicked its mandibles in surprise at the warrior's transformation. The silence stretched on, broken only by the soft beeping of medical equipment and the distant hum of the space station's engines. Hana stood frozen against the wall, her heart hammering in her chest as she watched the Krex read her brother's letter. She could see the alien's eyes moving back and forth across the page, reading certain lines multiple times, as if trying to make sure it understood correctly. Finally, the Krex looked up from the paper. Its gaze found Hana's face, and for the first time since she'd entered the medical bay, there was no hostility in its expression. Instead, there was something that looked almost like recognition, as if it was seeing her for the first time as more than just another weak human to be dismissed. The letter had been written on cheap hospital paper, the kind that tears easily and smudges when you touch it with wet fingers. Hana could see her brother's handwriting from across the room, those careful, shaky letters that took him so long to form. Kim Tae-ho was only 12 years old, but the cancer treatments had made his hands weak and unsteady. Every word on that page had been a struggle for him to write. The Krex's translator made soft clicking sounds as it worked to decode the Korean characters. The device wasn't designed for handwritten text, especially not the writing of a sick child whose letters wobbled and ran together. But slowly, word by word, the meaning began to come through in the alien's gravelly language. "Pig sister," the translator began, its mechanical voice somehow making the simple greeting sound both foreign and heartbreaking. The Krex's 4 eyes fixed on the paper with intense concentration, as if trying to understand how these marks on paper could carry such weight. Hana closed her eyes, not wanting to watch as her most private moment was shared with the room full of hostile aliens. She knew every word of that letter by heart, had read it so many times that the paper was soft as cloth from being folded and unfolded. Kim had written it 3 weeks ago, just after his latest round of chemotherapy, when the doctors had finally given them some hope. "Thank you for the medicine money," the translator continued, struggling with the child's simple phrasing. "The doctors say my treatments are working because of you." The Krex's massive head lifted slightly, glancing at Hana before returning to the letter. Around the medical bay, other aliens had stopped their conversations entirely. Even the medical staff had paused in their work, drawn by something in the warrior's changed demeanor. "I told the other sick kids about my hero sister who fights aliens," the mechanical voice went on. "They think you're the bravest person ever." Hana felt tears threatening to spill over. She remembered the video call when Tae-ho had told her about sharing stories with the other children in the cancer ward, how he'd shown them her old military photos and talked about his big sister who was fighting in space to keep bad aliens away from Earth. The kids had made her drawings and cards, all addressed to hero sister Hana. She kept them in her footlocker, back on her ship. The translator paused, processing a section where Tae-ho's handwriting had been particularly shaky. When it continued, the words hit the silent medical bay like physical blows. "I know you eat noodles every day to save money for us." The simple sentence contained a universe of sacrifice that only Hana fully understood. Military pay wasn't much to begin with, and after sending most of it home for Tae-ho's treatments, she was left with barely enough to survive. Instant noodles cost almost nothing and could stretch for days if you were careful. She'd been living on them for 8 months straight, along with whatever free meals she could get in the mess hall. Her uniform hung loose because she'd lost weight. Her boots had holes that she'd patched with tape because she couldn't afford new ones. She hadn't bought anything for herself except basic necessities since Tae-ho got sick. Every credit went home to pay for medicine that might give her little brother a chance to see his 13th birthday. "I love you," the translator finished, and somehow the mechanical voice made those 3 words sound even more precious than they had in Tae-ho's shaky handwriting. The Krex stood completely still, the letter trembling slightly in its massive clawed hand. Its 4 eyes stared at the paper, as if trying to make sense of what it had just heard. This wasn't the kind of communication it expected from what it considered an inferior species. There were no battle plans, No tactical discussions, no political maneuvering. Just a sick child thanking his sister for keeping him alive. Around the room, other aliens exchanged uncertain glances. The Thyran medic's large black eyes were wide with something that might have been understanding. Even the Zelon diplomat who had mocked humanity earlier was clicking its mandibles in what sounded like confusion rather than amusement. The truth was sinking in with devastating clarity. This human warrior, who appeared to own almost nothing, who wore a patched uniform and carried weapons that were decades behind galactic standards, was fighting not for glory or conquest or political power. She was fighting to earn enough money to keep her dying brother alive. Every meal she'd skipped, every comfort she'd given up, every dangerous mission she'd volunteered for, it was all for a 12-year-old boy lying in a hospital bed millions of miles away. A child who saw his big sister as a hero, not because she was the strongest or the most advanced, but because she loved him enough to sacrifice everything. The Krex's translator had gone silent, but the alien continued to stare at the letter. Its aggressive posture had completely disappeared, replaced by something that looked almost like shock. For the first time since the confrontation began, the massive warrior seemed smaller somehow, as if the simple words of a sick child had stripped away all its armor and attitude. The medical bay remained perfectly quiet, filled with aliens who were beginning to understand that they had badly misjudged not just Hana, but possibly humanity itself. The silence in the medical bay stretched on for what felt like hours, though it was probably only seconds. The Krex warrior stood motionless, holding the letter with a gentleness that seemed impossible for such massive claws. Its 4 hands, each capable of crushing steel, treated the simple piece of paper like it was made of the most delicate crystal. Slowly, with movements that were almost ritualistic, the alien began to fold the letter back along its original creases. Each fold was precise and careful, as if the warrior understood that this wasn't just paper and ink, it was hope and love made tangible. The letter had been folded and unfolded so many times that the creases were permanent, and the Krex followed them exactly, restoring the paper to the small rectangle that Hana had carried over her heart. When the folding was complete, the massive alien took a step toward Hana, then another. Its movements were completely different now, no longer the predatory stalking of a dominant warrior, but something closer to a pilgrimage. Other aliens in the medical bay pressed back against the walls, sensing that they were witnessing something unprecedented. Hana remained frozen against the wall, her injured leg trembling with the effort of supporting her weight. She watched in amazement as this creature, which had humiliated her just minutes before, approached with what could only be described as reverence. The warrior's 4 eyes never left her face, as if seeing her for the first time. When the Krex reached her, it stopped just an arm's length away. With movements that were almost ceremonial, it extended the letter toward her, not dropping it or tossing it carelessly, but offering it back with the kind of respect usually reserved for sacred objects. "Your words," the warrior said, its translator, working at barely above a whisper. "I return them to you." Hana reached out with shaking hands to take the letter. Her fingers brushed against the alien's claws as she accepted it, and she was surprised by how warm they were. She had expected something cold and reptilian, but the Krex's skin was warm with life and what might have been emotion. Then the impossible happened. The 8-foot warrior began to lower itself toward the floor, not kneeling, not crouching, but performing a movement that Hana had only heard described in military briefings about alien cultures. The Krex was assuming the position of the Karath Vel, the bow of ultimate honor that was reserved for the greatest heroes of their species. No human had ever seen a Krex perform the Karath Vel. Most humans didn't even know it existed. It was something the warrior species did, only for those who had achieved legendary status in battle, and even then, only after they had died gloriously. In combat. For a living being to receive such honor was unheard of. For a human to receive it was beyond comprehension. The alien's massive form folded downward until its head nearly touched the floor at Hana's feet. Its 4 arms spread wide, in a gesture of complete vulnerability, exposing its neck and vital organs to potential attack. In Krex culture, this was the ultimate expression of respect and acknowledgement of superiority. Gasps echoed through the medical bay. A Thyran medic dropped its medical scanner with a clatter that seemed to echo like thunder in the stunned silence. The Zellan diplomat's compound eyes went wide with shock, and it began clicking its mandibles in rapid, agitated bursts. Even the crystalline Nexari stopped their musical chiming entirely. "I have misunderstood human strength," the Krek said, its voice muffled by its position but still clear through the translator. The mechanical device seemed to struggle with the alien's changed tone, producing words that sounded almost gentle. "Among my people, we measure warriors by the number of enemies they have killed in battle, by the fear they inspire in their foes, by the territory they conquer and the wealth they accumulate." The warrior remained in its prostrate position as it continued speaking. "But you fight not for glory or conquest, not for fear or dominance. You fight to save those who cannot save themselves. You sacrifice everything, your comfort, your health, your very life, not to destroy but to preserve." Slowly the Kreks began to rise from its bow. When it stood again, its posture was completely transformed. Gone was the aggressive dominance it had displayed earlier. Instead, there was something that looked almost like humility in its stance. "This is a strength my people do not understand," the alien continued. "We can break worlds and shatter fleets, but we cannot do what you do. We cannot love something more than ourselves." The warrior stepped aside and gestured toward the chair by the viewport, the same chair it had claimed so aggressively earlier. But the gesture was different now, filled with respect rather than condescension. "Please," it said simply, "but the—" Krex wasn't finished. With movements that were both careful and decisive, it reached up and unfastened the ceremonial cloak that hung from its shoulders. The garment was clearly important, made from some kind of scaled hide that shimmered in the medical bay's lights, decorated with symbols that spoke of battles won and honors earned. The alien spread the cloak over the chair's cushioned seat, transforming it from simple furniture into something approaching a throne. The cloak would provide padding for Hannah's injured leg and protection from the cold metal arms of the chair. "For your comfort," the Krek said, stepping back to give her space. Hannah looked around the medical bay and saw that every single alien was staring at her with expressions she had never seen before, not mockery or dismissal or casual indifference, but something that looked like wonder, like they were seeing not just her but humanity itself in a completely new light. The Thyran medic approached slowly, its medical kit in hand and tears in its large black eyes. "Please," it whispered, "let me help you to the chair. It would be an honor."